Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Patton McDowell, and happy to give you actionable ideas to elevate your current or perhaps your future nonprofit organization. Thanks, as always, for listening. If you're a current nonprofit leader or hope to be one, you're in the right place. I'm glad to bring you these weekly conversations with nonprofit experts who are really on the cutting edge of our sector. And if you would, do me a favor, share this episode with just one other person so we can continue to build a global community focused on nonprofit leadership. Well, I had a fantastic conversation in this episode with John Bennett, who brings great insight to our discussion about what it takes to be an excellent nonprofit leader. Now, Dr. Bennett has not only experienced leadership in the charitable sector himself, but as the director of graduate programs at Queen's University of Charlotte, he's researching leadership, he's writing about leadership, and he's teaching leadership. And as a result, you're going to learn 3 keys to being an effective nonprofit leader. And I'll give you a hint. These 3 keys may not be exactly what you would expect, as John has really evaluated the subtle but critical elements that differentiate great leaders from the rest. Well, lots to unpack here, and so I hope you won't forget. Check out the show notes. This is episode number 117. Just go to the podcast or the news page at pattonmcdowell.com, and you'll find all of the resources we discussed, as well as more information on John and the great work he's doing at the McCall School of Business at Queen's University. Speaking of resources, while you're on our website, make sure you connect with us. We're on all of the primary social media platforms. And let us know how we can help your nonprofit organization. Maybe it's with strategic planning. Maybe it's time to re-engage your board through a workshop. Or maybe you and I can talk about your next steps on your journey towards senior leadership in the charitable sector. We've got coaching, training, and a unique mastermind program that may be of interest to you. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with John Bennett. John, thank you for joining me on the path.
Well, it's good to be here, Pat, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you and share some thoughts with folks that are paying attention to your podcast, which is absolutely terrific resource.
Well, you're nice to say that, and I know our listeners are going to benefit from the fantastic experience you have. And you have literally worked in the nonprofit sector. We'll talk about that. But now, of course, you're teaching, you're researching on topics like organizational development and leadership in particular. Obviously, your work applies to all sectors, but what I'm excited about is that you have applied it very much to nonprofit leaders and continue to work with nonprofit leaders all over the country. Before we get started, given all of the great work you've done, John, is there something you're particularly proud of in your work with nonprofit leaders?
Well, that's I think about that. I think about it in maybe a couple of places. One was my 18 years with the American Red Cross. I had the fortune of literally moving from being an intern to a part-time role to a full-time role, and 18 years later, I left the Red Cross as having been a CEO for regional biomedical operations in a couple of locations. And so I had the opportunity to be front and center with what I think of as supporting those who delivered essential human services in communities in 6 locations, which was just a phenomenal experience and opportunity. And when I think about that, there are so many opportunities that I had, and but the theme that I think really surfaces as we think about not-for-profit leadership or leadership in general is the role that you can play as a leader in fostering the kinds of work that enables people to have the equipment, being equipped, being empowered, and being engaged in the mission of the organization. And I realize that so many times, particularly in not-for-profits, I see that leaders get so caught up in the mission that they sometimes lose the balance for themselves. And that's such a challenge when you're so caught up in the work that you're doing. So as I think about my time with Red Cross, there's so many experiences, whether it was in disaster relief or innovative services or other kinds of things that I was a part of supporting. But the real key for me is leaving behind organizations that were stronger. And I think about organizational leaders is having the drive to not only make sure that essential services are provided and whatever that calling is, whatever that organization is, but I think more significantly perhaps is leaving the organization and its people in a way that are even stronger.
Love
And I've
that,
certainly
John.
been, yeah, and I've been able to continue doing that and kind of this second and third phases of my own career in my life, and the second being around coaching and consulting work, where I've had the opportunity to work with many boards and in organizational leaders in not-for-profit sector to be able to help them to be more effective in the work that they do. And now for the last 15 years at Queen's University, where I'm able to teach graduate students to help them develop their capacity to be stronger leaders and build stronger organizations. So I'm not naming any one thing, Patton, but hopefully I'm giving some example there of the kinds of things that I think are impactful.
It's a great response. And in fact, I love in particular your encouragement to, in essence, a nonprofit leader to be able to step back and think about the long-term kind of impact they're having and investment they're having in their organization, because it is often, as you well know, easy to get caught up in the day-to-day grind of the work. And so I'm hoping this podcast in general allows nonprofit leaders to step back and think about some of these longer strategic topics that you are very adept at addressing. In fact, speaking of managing the volume, and as you know, nonprofit leaders are managing a lot, an incredible amount of volume, often understaffed, under-resourced. And of course, you're juggling a lot. You know, you're teaching, you're researching, you're writing, you're consulting. I wonder, have you found anything in particular that helps you manage the volume of all your work?
Well, I think there are two sides to that. One is managing it to get things done, and the other is to manage it to have balance.
Good point.
There's an article in the New York Times today that's talking about how during COVID we have had perhaps more hours of work, which really, but our productivity hasn't gone up. and we've worked harder and probably had less balance, which I think is so often the case for us, particularly I find in not-for-profit organizations where the leaders are so called to the mission, and it can be a 24/7 kind of role. Some of the things that I've experienced and learned through the years, one is that I am driven by calendar. I
Yes.
probably to an obsession that if you want me to do something, it's got to get in two places. One is you got to get it on my calendar, and the other is it's got to get on my to-do list. And I've played around for so many years with that. And in fact, I used to get laughed at when I was in college, 150 years ago, is I was probably the only person on campus that had a daytime timer, and I did because I live by that kind of calendaring and to-do list making. One resource that I have found that's terrific, and I think you've had her on maybe as one of your guests as well, is Carson Tate wrote a book. She's one of our graduates, and she wrote a book called Working Simply. And what I particularly like about it is not only that Carson wrote it, she's a great resource, but she also took an approach that looks at how do we think? What is our thinking style preferences? And then how do we manage our time and our work based on that? Because David Allen wrote another terrific book on time management. And one of the things is getting the style that works for you, realizing that your tools may not be my tools. And I think that's part of the challenge that we have, is that one size does not fit all, and we have to juggle until we figure that out. So for me, calendars and to-do lists, that's it.
Great reinforcement. And in fact, I'm delighted to lift up Carson Tate's wonderful episode in her book. And I am a big fan indeed of David Allen, getting things done as a methodology to stay organized. And so I'm glad we can offer our listeners those recommendations, if you will. The bulk of our conversation, John, I know our listeners are going to be benefiting from this, is your thoughts about effective leadership in the nonprofit sector. In fact, I think we're going to lift up three in particular, and we may vary in and out of those to expand. But let's talk about the first one. And we talk about self-awareness and the importance of self. You really believe that the use of self as a leader is a critical component. But what do you mean by that?
Yeah. It's a concept that the term is used often, but I don't know that it's always fully understood. And from my perspective, use of self is understanding who you are and then using and leveraging the tool of self. And that may mean your interest, your skills, your dark sides, your less developed, your most well-developed self, the things that you bring to the table. And I think about it in terms of the gifts that we bring, as well as the things that we don't have. Or say it another way, that I ask the question often: is what I'm doing and what I'm bringing to any situation a propeller that's moving things forward, or is it a boat anchor that's holding me and the work behind?
Interesting.
Holding it back. And so for me, this involves a number of things, but use of self starts with awareness. And I think it's so critical for leaders to have an understanding of who they are, what are their strengths. And I don't mean it in the sense of strength finder kind of terminology, but what I mean there is, what are your skills, your knowledge, your background, your mental models, your values, your underlying assumptions about the work and about the people that you're engaged in, the work that needs to be done, so that you're attuned to that. And then the other side of that is, what am I not particularly good at? What is it that's less well developed about me? And in some cases, what's less well developed in a way that allows me to say, how do I develop that? Or how do I let go of that and outsource it, so to speak? How
Right.
can I hire people around me that fill in to make the combination of what I bring and what they bring to be the whole of what is needed? And so a good test for all of that is, under pressure, how do we show up? Under
Interesting. Yep.
pressure, what do we bring? Because it's a lot easier for us to show our competent selves when we are in our easier, more natural, no headache kind of day, as opposed to what happens when we get under stress, or where things don't go well, or we have to show some agility. Those are the opportunities for us to look at those less well-developed sides and say, what's showing up in me right now? Because as a leader, you're a tool, you're an instrument in the relationships that you have, in the leadership that you exert within the organization, and the ways that you represent not only yourself, but the organizations that you're leading.
So well put. And I guess we all have blind spots. And it struck me that your framework of, all right, thinking about my high stress situations would be a great launching point, maybe for a conversation with a friend or a colleague, to explore my blind spots, my weaknesses, my self-awareness, or how do I, John, better understand, obviously, blind spots that I'm simply not aware.
Sure. Well, I'm a big proponent of being a reflective practitioner.
Yep.
We can talk more about that, but feedback is a key part of that. Part of that feedback comes from self. And we think about feedback as being something that's often resisted, or somebody says, may I offer you feedback? And you go, I don't want anything negative.
Right.
But we live in a world of feedback, whether that is the cruise control on our car, the thermostat at home, or it's the interactions that we have with other people. And so I think a well-developed leader is one that has emotional and social intelligence, that's able to start with understanding who they are. And the way we do that is by getting feedback along the way. And good leaders will seek feedback. What we also know is that the higher you go in the organization, the less likely people are to speak truth to you.
Yep.
And so how do you create a culture of feedback, one in which feedback is sought after, revered, incorporated, It doesn't mean that every time somebody gives you feedback, you have to accept it, because feedback is really a gift. What do we do with gifts? Sometimes we open them and use them. Sometimes we put them in the closet and try to forget about them. Sometimes we re-gift them.
Exactly.
Sometimes we exchange gifts. We take it back to the store and get something we really wanted. So there are a variety of ways that we can view feedback, but it's so critical to self-awareness, and self-awareness is critical to developing ourselves, and developing ourselves is critical to being able to use ourselves.
Yeah, it's well put. And it strikes me that as a leader of a nonprofit, you may need to be proactive to seek that feedback. John, I hear from a lot of executive directors, their annual review process, whatever formal process exists, is done by somewhat disassociated board members often. And so they're not necessarily able to get good feedback. So is your suggestion that as a leader, I may need to be proactive and create a 360 structure to assure I'm getting feedback? How do I do that? In other words, if I'm not getting good feedback and I need to.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways that we can think about feedback and getting feedback for leaders is separating feedback from performance review. And I think so often we think about all of that having to come at once, when in fact, feedback should be something that's done throughout the year and not just on an annual review. The annual review is the culmination of the feedback and at a point in time. And you're right. I mean, I serve on boards. I've served on many boards. I've worked with many executive leaders in organizations. And it's very difficult for a board or a committee of the board who has limited interaction. You don't see on a day-to-day basis. And often what you do here is either the very highest praise or the issues that are in trouble. You don't hear the middle parts, right? And I think that's often what's missing in that feedback. So ways of doing that, absolutely. Start with seeking feedback and creating culture around you where you can get feedback. Create formal systems, whether it's a multi-rater feedback instrument of some sort that looks at your leadership competencies or looks at any point in time. For example, the leader is a reflection of the culture of the organization. So perhaps some kind of employee engagement survey is a reflection of the leader as well. Or some kind of culture assessment. All of those are ways of doing that. And then really looking holistically at how that person shows up in multiple settings. So let me give you an example.
Yep.
I can imagine an executive in an organization, a not-for-profit organization, having a lot of interaction with their staff and with their board, but also in the community, whatever their role might be, with key donors, with partner organizations, constituent groups, whatever it might be. The tendency would be that the board would look at the experience that they have with that staff person, with that leader. How are they getting feedback? How the staff experiences them? How do they get feedback from how the constituents in the community experience them? And when you can collect multiple sources of information, we know good research says we triangulate our data. We get multiple points. If you want to know where you are, you got to have 3 points, and you need to find the spot in the middle. And that's what you need to find in building those systems in place.
No, it's well put. And I'm thinking about a previous point you made about the difficulty as we climb the ladder to get authentic feedback from those that report to us. As we get higher up, they're going to be. So I guess number one, we've got to create a culture where there's a comfort with that. And in thinking about 360 processes, John, a lot of nonprofits are such a small shop that it's hard, who said what. And so I guess, how do we create an environment that can get valid feedback? Do we need to get an outside source to help us aggregate this feedback? Because, if I only have 3 kind of direct reports, I'm probably going to know who's saying what.
Yeah. Well, I think that can be a way of doing it, to get somebody from the outside to collect some data and then make it as anonymous as possible. The other is, how do you create an environment where feedback doesn't have to be anonymous? There's a different value set. In other words, that you create an environment where people can speak to you in a way that says, in a constructive manner, here's what I'm experiencing. Here's what I need from you. Here's what you're doing that's working. Here's what we're doing that's not working. And so the idea that you've got to bring somebody in from the outside certainly is a powerful tool. It's also can be an expensive tool.
Right.
And so what I always say is, if you can't get the feedback that you need by yourself, partially because there may be volume, there may be too many people, but can you get people to speak honestly about you? If not, there's a piece of feedback right there.
Yes. It's a great point. And well, I'm just glad you're encouraging our listeners to think about the level of self-awareness they have now and ways they can, in a practical manner, improve that and avoid some of these blind spots, create systems to indeed assure that greater kind of awareness. You also talk about a key differentiator between good leaders and great leaders. And this leads to the second of our three keys. What exactly is that differentiator, a skill or ability that you think makes that difference?
So one of the models that I was exposed to 20 plus years ago was by a firm named MRG, and they've developed a leadership competency model that's a pretty sophisticated tool. And they've done research globally in all sectors of our economy, for-profit, not-for-profit, and government. And as they've looked at what are those things that differentiate average leaders from exceptional leaders, the number one differentiator is the ability to think and act strategically. And that, by definition, is having the long and broad view. And I think as a leader, particularly a senior leader in an organization, you should not be in the operations of the business. You should know about them. You should manage those. But in terms of leadership, leadership is about vision and direction. It's about the future. It's not about the past, and it's not primarily focused on the present. It's about what needs to be done, what's on the horizon. So another way of imagining that is, I don't know about you, but I remember when I was learning to drive a car, and I remember the first few times driving a car, I was paying attention to about maybe 5 feet across the hood. As I've learned to drive and I've gotten more skilled at driving, one of the things that happened was my focus shifted.
Yes.
And I started looking at scanning the environment ahead of me and looking at a longer range and looking at the sides, not just in front of me, but what's happening on my sides, what's happening behind me, what's happening in front of me, what's happening in the distance, as well as what's happening in the near term. And so as we think about developing a strategic mindset, the ability to think and act strategically, what we're looking at is what's on the horizon. What is it that you need to anticipate so that you can guide the organization and you can build the capacity of the organization to be ready for the next change? Because what we know is change is going to happen.
Indeed.
When I consult and when I coach, I one of my premises is if the organization wants to just implement a change and be done with it, I say, I'm not interested in working with you.
Right.
People say, why is that? And I say, well, the reason is I believe that the change that you're experiencing now is building the capacity for the next change, one that you might not even know is on the horizon yet, but you can anticipate that there's a capacity building that needs to occur. So that's the number one differentiator. By the way, number two is the ability to effectively communicate. And that means both listening and sharing information. Message sent, message received. And yeah, and I'll just give you number three off that list.
Yeah, while we're give some bonus points here.
Yeah, is excitement. And when you think about the role that a leader plays, it's about being somewhat like a cheerleader to say, here's the direction we're taking, and let's get excited about it. How do we build that kind of momentum? Because as we know, organizations and individuals like comfort. We like stability. And when we're leading, we're pushing people beyond what they've imagined for themselves and for the organization.
That's so well put. And I'm glad. I want to repeat those. So number one, strategic thinking, which I want to ask you about in a minute. Number two is communication, which I'm a huge fan of, as you said, both delivering and hoping that is received clearly. And then there's a motivational factor, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a leader, we naturally have to push people beyond their comfort zone. Therefore, if we're not a good motivator ourselves, we're not going to be successful.
Yeah. And I think a leader is there to take the people in the organization to places that have not yet been imagined.
That's a great way to put it. Let me go back to strategic thinking for a minute, though.
Yeah.
Again, as a nonprofit leader, I'm listening to you. All right, John, I was the founder. I had to roll up my sleeves, so I was in the mix. And I often find nonprofit leaders, even if they've been around a while, they still gravitate to maybe the programming or the work that got them involved in nonprofit. And you're saying, in essence, we've got to delegate, right? If we're still, I guess the question that I'm leading to is, how do we know if we're too far into the weeds? Maybe that gets back to your self-awareness topic of number one.
Yeah, it does. It's awareness of that. And it's reminding me of a recent coaching client that I had that was a senior leader, not in a not-for-profit, but in a for-profit environment, has a very large organization, about 1,200 employees in North America and South America. And one of the things that they were experiencing was, how were they spending their time? And we had to do some work to kind of shift the mindset and then the behavior. And the mindset shift was, how do I see myself? And if I see myself spending the time on the operations, I'm doing someone else's job. If I'm spending the time on managing in a not-for-profit, managing the board, managing the external relations, often playing a big role in fundraising, resource development, whatever it might be called there. But it's not about managing the things that you were really comfortable. Marshall Goldsmith wrote a book a number of years ago, the title of which is "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," which I think is a great image for us to think about, because we get into a comfort zone. Sharon wrote a book about the talent pipeline and the switchbacks that occur when we move up to levels of organization. Boudreaux has written about this notion of how, as you move up the organization, what kind of decision-making style do you use? And I actually used that with my client recently, and I said, let's talk about how what you're doing is being decisive, when in fact, as a senior leader, often what you need to do is be more an integrator for decisions than being the decision maker. And in that case, it was a real shift for them to go, how am I operating? And that is use of self, but it's also moving into that more strategic, long-term, broader view, and getting out of the things that we might have comfort for. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that give me comfort. And I'm not suggesting that you need to abandon all of those, but in holding on to those things, what are they preventing you from getting done?
Absolutely.
What is it that only you can do that no one else can do or should do? Which leads me to a question that, it's a piece I try to live by. In fact, I have a hard time saying no. Somebody gave me for my birthday a few years ago one of those little signs that stands on your desk. Normally it has somebody's name on it.
Right.
The one they gave me says nope, N-O-P-E. And what I've been trying to do is, when a task comes up or an opportunity comes up, is to simply ask these questions. Why are you asking me? Why does it need to be done? Why does it need to be done now? And why does it need to be done in that way? And if I get the answers to those questions, then what that does is helps me figure out, am I doing the things I need to be doing?
Absolutely. John, I use the phrase highest value role, and it seems exactly what you illustrated there.
Yeah.
That yes, we can do things that are comfortable, we're good at, we've done them for years, but is it truly, as a nonprofit leader, the highest value role for me to be able to doing this versus, as you said, external, in the community, strategic thinking? I wonder, John, is an exercise to help a nonprofit leader reflect on this simply doing kind of a deep dive into my calendar over the last month,
Yeah.
and or how do you help, I guess, a leader evaluate, wow, I'm spending too much time doing the wrong things?
Well, I'll return to the recent case example that I mentioned. One of the things I asked that person to do was just simply color code their calendar.
Yep.
So
Yep.
in their electronic calendar, use the categories and then take a glance over the last month. Where are you spending your time? What are you doing? Is that the place you need to be spending your time? And in this case, it was an eye opener for the person to go, I'm spending too much of my time solving other people's problems. And one of the things they did was they simply shifted when somebody came to them and wanted help with something. They simply started with the question, what do you want out of this conversation? And what they found was that a 30-minute block of time shifted to only being a 10-minute meeting.
Interesting.
And if you add up those 20-minute blocks in the course of a day, they were saving themselves an hour or so. I said, wow, that means you can go out and run or swim or do whatever you want to do, and maybe work less. Yeah.
What a great way to reframe things. Back to your point about our managing our time and balancing our time, that act of calendar reflection
Yeah.
saved a ton of time. Gosh, you think about those 5 hours over the course of a week, over a month, all of a sudden you indeed have more time than maybe you thought you did.
Sure.
Uh,
Well, and time is the great equalizer. You
yep.
you and I both started at midnight with the same 24 hours in this day.
Yep.
The question is, how do I use the gift of the time I have?
It's a great point, and it's something we need to reflect upon. And I bet you're doing it a lot as you coach. In fact, you're an expert in leadership coaching. I'm going to lift up your book, Coaching for Change, as a real resource in providing a framework for leaders to, frankly, and leaders are coaching others, right? So you're coaching coaches to help them get even more effective in their management. What are some of the themes that you run into as you're coaching, in particular nonprofit leaders? Are there any things or things that bubble up in particular?
Yeah, I think you just named one, and that is, how do I let go of the things that I'm doing that somebody else can and should be doing, the kinds of
Yep.
things that are not my highest and best use of my talents, my resources, and how do I then develop those things that I need, those skills, those competencies, those abilities to allow me to more effectively do the things that I am called to do in the role that I'm in. That's a key part of it. And often, the challenge of leaders in any organization and not-for-profits, I think, are so focused on relationship. So for me, relationship would be kind of that third tip here, is whether you're in a relationship with someone that you're managing, you're in a relationship with a board member, you're in a relationship with a partner in the community or in some other organization, a funder or whatever. How do you build those relationships? And so often in coaching, what I find is that we are working on productivity,
Yep.
focus. We're focused on working on these kinds of conflicts and relationship building that need to happen. And then kind of coupled in all of that is the theme of developing self in order to lead change. And our belief in writing that book, and thank you for mentioning it, is that all coaching is about change. Whether I'm helping you coach, by coaching you, I'm helping you change individually, or I'm helping you as a leader to lead the change of an organization, or perhaps someone that you're managing. So for us, everything is about change. And it starts with self-awareness and a choice about what you need to do to work on, to adopt new behaviors in order to integrate those into who you are and how you show up. It's easy to get off track when you're starting out with a new skill. We've all done that, where we learn a skill, we try something, and it doesn't work. And what do? We go back to the old way.
Yep.
So part of what we do in the process of coaching is to help people sustain those mindset and skill set, those behavioral changes that enable them to develop to a point of mastery. And for me, mastery is about the ability to adapt and adopt new behaviors, to continuously learn, to look at opportunities as learning opportunities, growth opportunities, to be able to innovate when I don't know what to do. How do I adapt from the experiences that I've had in the past? It's
Right.
better known as learning agility. Yeah.
Love how you weave these themes together. And of course, that is an overall point I know you make very well, that leaders have to integrate these concepts of self-awareness, strategic thinking, the whole dynamic of coaching and the relationship building. I guess on the relationship building front, John, we all talk about, I know as a leader, I need to manage relationships well, but how do you assess that when you're working with someone, or how should I self-assess my ability to be a good relationship manager?
I find that so often the relationships get off track when the expectations of the relationship are not clearly understood and agreed upon.
Interesting.
It starts with contracting. So here's a little set of tips, if you will. And I think of this anytime I'm interacting with someone, and whether it's new relationship or an existing relationship, whether I'm working with a group or I'm working with an individual. And the 4 questions are: who am I? Who are you? Why are we here? And how will we operate? How will we function? And so when you think about who am I and who are you in this relationship, in this context, we bring so much of who we are, but which parts of us are critical in this relationship at this moment?
Right.
Why are we here? It's kind of that existential question of why are we here? Well, I find so often I've worked with groups that don't know why they exist. Surprise, surprise.
Right. No wonder they're struggling. Yeah.
Yeah. Does your organization know its purpose? Do you keep that purpose front and center? I often suggest to people that you put on your meeting agendas your mission statement, and that you align your agendas with your priorities. If you look at your agendas and you can't find the things that are aligned with your priorities, ask yourself the question, why are we having the conversation? If we've got meeting agendas that don't align with our priorities and we're not focused on our mission, what are we doing? So that's a key piece of why are we here? And then how do we operate? I'm a believer, as you know, you got an MBA. We talk about culture eats strategy for lunch.
Yes.
I heard that phrase. I think Peter Drucker
yes.
said that. Well, I have another version of that in working with groups, and that is process eats task for lunch. And what happens so often, I find, is we don't pay attention to the process. We jump right into the task. I teach a course on interpersonal and group dynamics, and I can teach this stuff, and we have all this conversation, and then I give a group a task. And what do? They go right into task. They don't pay attention to the process.
Yes.
And we have to pause and go, what's going on? Well, we didn't pay attention to process. We just jumped right into the doing. And I think that's a challenge for us.
Such a good point. And I've been guilty of that in my kind of nonprofit career. You're right. We just jump to getting it done, frankly, because it's the way we've always done things. Yeah. And it seems to me, John, you're reminding us over and over that we need to step back. We need to reflect on. And I love those questions to frame all of our relationships, because not only will it make our work with these key relationships more strategic, it sounds like we'll also save some time, that we're wasting spinning our wheels around many of these same topics.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, let me shift gears with you. And you've got some really exciting developments in the graduate education space. You're working on a new and even further evolved Master's in Talent Organization Development. And let me say that again, Master's in Talent and Organization Development. But let me ask you this question before we get into the specifics of this very nice program. When should a nonprofit leader consider graduate education? John, you're counseling many of them that are pondering your program or others like it. What are some of the key characteristics that you discuss as to when someone should or maybe shouldn't consider graduate education?
It's a terrific question. And when I think about people who come into graduate programs, and I went a year after college, I went into a master's program, and And then I was a mid-career doctoral student. So, and just like you, we weren't right out of college, and there are other obligations and life priorities that came into play before we ever got there. And I think that the time to go to graduate school is when it's right for you. That's kind of a
Yeah,
vague
good
answer,
answer. Good
but
answer though.
it's, yeah, I'm hedging on that. But what is the right time for somebody? First of all, we all are busy. So when can you carve out the time to learn? When are you ready to develop yourself?
Yep.
When are you curious about the depth of something? And I'll often tell people, if you look at the curriculum for any graduate program or any undergraduate program for that matter, and you look at it and you see, I really like about half of those courses. That might be a good place to start. If,
Right.
on the other hand, you look at it and you go, there are only a couple of classes in here that I'm interested in. The rest of them, I just can't imagine sitting through. That's not of interest to me. Then that's probably not the program for you.
Tells you something, doesn't it?
Right. Now, I would also say, make sure that you've got a good support system around you. And that means, for a not-for-profit executive, probably things like, not only at home what support you need, because you might not get as much time to go to the soccer game, or you might not get all the laundry done exactly as you'd planned to do it, or whatever, but make sure that you have that support in place, and that you also have the support for yourself in that space. The people around you who will not only encourage you, or perhaps read a paper for you and give you some feedback on it, or whatever might be needed. So that's a piece. And then get your board support. If you're an executive of a not-for-profit, get them to support you, and know that you're going about this as a journey in your own learning, because that's an investment in you, and by default, it's an investment of the organization. So all of those kinds of things come into play, and you got to make some choices, and
Right.
it's a commitment. But you can usually make a commitment like that for a couple of years. It's not a lifetime commitment. You're not going to be in school in a graduate program all your life.
Forever.
You're probably going to
Right.
be only in it for a couple of years. Well, in the greater scheme of life, that's a short time.
Great point. Great advice. Again, I know you and I both have colleagues in the nonprofit sector pondering additional certification, graduate education, and you, in fact, are leading the charge at Queens through the McCall School, which to me is encouraging, John, about the professionalization of the nonprofit sector. It is a
Mm-hmm.
legitimate career. When you and
Mm-hmm.
I first started, I had family members literally say that, that's nice that you're working for a nonprofit, but when are you going to get a real job? Was the
Mm-hmm.
implication.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see programs like yours reinforce, no, this is a real job. And talk about what you're doing through this new master's program,
Yeah.
and why you're doing it.
Well, at Queens and at the McCall School, we have a master's in business administration that has a variety of concentrations and specializations. We also have had for since 2008 a master's degree in organization development. Over the last couple of years, we've been doing some revamping of that program, and we're excited to launch in fall of 2021 a new version of that program. And it's a master's in talent and organization development. And we've included in that a number of concentrations or specializations. One of those will be in not-for-profit leadership. What that will include is courses that are specific to the not-for-profit sector around how not-for-profits actually operate. What does it mean to manage and lead in that environment, as well as how do you operate in terms of resource development and utilization, whether that's financial, fundraising kinds of things, which are so critical, but also volunteer resource management. So we've added some courses, we're adding some specialization. And in addition to that, we have about 14 non-degree certificate programs. So someone who's interested in not-for-profit leadership can complete a 3-graduate course certificate in not-for-profit leadership. If they decide later they want to earn a master's degree, those credits can be used toward the master's degree. So it's a stackable credential in that way. So.
That's fantastic. Well, and I'm excited to share in our show notes more information. Of course, I hope this gets our listeners thinking in general about what are they going to do to advance their career, their education, some of these professional opportunities. And John, I take it you're using all the latest technology platforms so that someone does not have to be local to take advantage of many of the things you're offering.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. One of the shifts that we've made, and I think COVID has taught us a lot about how we learn and operate and function in a virtual world. And so the revamped program will be offered in a virtual format. So other than coming to campus for a residency weekend for just a short time, the rest of the program can be completed either in an online synchronous format, so kind of Zoom format, or in a online asynchronous. So we use a learning management system. And so those opportunities are available. And we think that's a great opportunity for so many people around the country and even around the world to participate in ways that will further their careers and advance the work that they're doing in organizations.
So I could be part of a group, John, and a cohort, if you will, or I could take it at my own pace. Is that fair?
Well, it's not self-paced. It's self-paced in the sense that if you need to take a semester off, you can do so.
Okay.
But it's not self-paced courses, so to speak. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, again, lots of great information there. We will have it in the show notes, and I'm delighted to lift it up as a resource for the listener who has, by listening to this episode, had to step back and think about the windshield on the horizon instead of just looking at one step ahead. That's such a good analogy. I'm reflecting on it even as we speak now. Well, let's talk, though. My closing question to you, John, is anything else you would add in addition to the great feedback you've offered in this conversation for someone thinking about nonprofit leadership, maybe for the first time or advancing? What do you tell them as they ponder this profession?
Well, I say this to anybody who's beginning a career, no matter where it is, or shifting careers. Follow your passion. I find so often people are doing work that they have to do because they need the paycheck and they're not getting the payback.
Right.
And one of the great things about working in not-for-profit organizations is they tend to be extremely mission driven, and they tend to focus on things that people are passionate about. And find your passion, fulfill the passion, lean into your skills, and do the kind of work that adds value in the way that you describe value, and find ways that can leverage who you are and help you grow to be more of who you are.
Well put, John. Great advice and encouragement as you have provided throughout this conversation. You've provided, in fact, a number of wonderful books, resources, and other ideas. Is there one book in particular you might lift up in addition to those already mentioned that you recommend? Or I know that's an impossible question for a man that's got a lot of books on the bookshelf. Maybe you could give us one.
Well, I'll tell you what I've done. I've got a blog post I did recently where I asked people that were around me to kind of make suggestions of books that had been influential to them.
Nice.
And so there's some resources there. But one of the things that I'm finding is the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. And so I'm constantly reading. I've got a goal this year of reading a book a week.
Nice.
And so I'm trying to do that. And there's so many great resources. And what I always say is whatever your interests are, pursue those. And then look at what those sources are using. So if you read a book, look at the reference list. If it's something of interest, go read another book. Don't just read one point of view, read multiple points of view and pursue that. I got into I'm going to read Martin Luther King's sermons, and I'm going to read biography about Martin Luther King, and that sprung me into reading James Baldwin, and I went into a path of reading 3 or 4 books by James Baldwin earlier this year. So I say that just to say, pursue those things that are of interest to you, find those things that will continue to stimulate your thinking and help you grow, stretch you out of your comfort zone, and reinforce those kind of comforts that you need.
It's a great strategy. I am like you, I'm attempting the book a week goal. I'm falling behind, though, John, I confess, but I am trying to stay on a pace of roughly one book a week. So I'm glad to
Yeah,
hear that you are leading the charge there. And I'm guessing we can maybe link to your blog about
yeah,
all of the good books that you have been offered and recommending to others. That'd be a wonderful resource as well.
absolutely. And if I can put the plug in for the website that'll take you to that, uh, www.lawton, LAWTON-associates.com. And that's certainly a place that people are welcome to join in and see the resources that are available.
Absolutely. We'll have your consulting practice in the show notes. And where else, John, can people go to find out more about you and, of course, the great work you're doing through Lawton and or Queens?
Yeah. So Queens is www.queens.edu, and you can search for the McCall School and find our graduate programs as well as our undergraduate programs, including the new soon-to-be launched certificate in concentration in not-for-profit leadership. And certainly reach out to me. I love to connect with people by LinkedIn, and a great resource as well. So any of those are possibilities.
We'll have them all in the show notes, as well as numerous resources you lifted up. And for all of this, John, thank you for the great work you're doing for our sector and in our sector. And thanks for joining me on the path.
Patton, thank you so much for allowing me to join you today. It's been a great conversation, and certainly want to support the work that you do to help organizations build their capacity to do their mission.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with John as much as I did and came away with some practical ideas that can guide you on your career journey in our sector and enhance the way you think about your leadership skills. Don't forget the show notes. They are available on our website, pattonmcdowell.com, and you can find out more about John, the new Masters in Talent and Organization Development at Queens, and some of his great reading recommendations. In fact, he has a post with 35 high-impact books that you really need to check out. As always, please share this episode with someone else on the path. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. You can do that by going to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com, and you'll see links to all of the primary podcast platforms. Don't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. They come out every Thursday, as well as bonus features we're producing at least once a month. Thanks for all you're doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now. And keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time on The Path.